So I have reviewed the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and I really love the discussion we just had. I have a little comment regarding Target 7. So Target 7 is reducing pollution from all sources to levels that are not harmful to biodiversity and ecosystem functions and human health, including by reducing nutrients lost to the environment by at least half and pesticides by at least 2/3, and eliminating the discharge of plastic waste. I really like this target, and I have a research focus on plastic waste. However, I do think that we also have to eliminate the discharge of plastic waste and chemical and nuclear waste. So that's my suggestion to this target. I think not just plastic waste are harmful to our human and biological and biodiversity ecosystem, but chemical and nuclear waste are equally harmful and they are very alarming. So that's my suggestion. And also regarding Target 19, the panelists just discussed that I really like the idea that we are increasing financial resources from all sources to at least $200 billion per year, including new, additional, and effective financial resources. I really like this idea. However, I also do like to mention that maybe we could probably consider the idea of adding only including legal financial resources, so not just new, additional, and effective, but also legal financial resources. Yeah, so these two are my major comments, and thank you very much.
That's great. Who would like to respond to that? Bala, would you like to make a comment?
Sure. Thank you for that two very specific comments. Certainly just two bits of information in support of your call for focusing on the issue of pollution. Certainly, we did have a similar target in the IG biodiversity targets when they were drafted for the period 2011-2020. So it's basically a reiteration of that, but also expanding the scope to include other elements as well. And as we are speaking, one activity which is very, very relevant in support of that particular target is the increasing interest of cooperation between various multilateral environmental agreements that focus on the issue of chemicals, waste, and pollution. Because for those of you who may not know, we have a set of, like the Convention on Biological Diversity, we also have some conventions that focus on issues of chemicals, waste, and pollution. They're called the Basel Convention, the Rotterdam Convention, the Stockholm Convention, the Minamata Convention on Mercury. So as we are speaking, there is now a kind of a guidance document that is supporting synergistic action between the Convention on Biological Diversity and the related biodiversity conventions and the chemicals conventions. And the reason I'm mentioning it is that the idea behind this support to synergies, which is supported by UNEP, is also not only to look at the impacts of pollution on biodiversity, but also to look at how the discussions in decision making that happens within these multilateral agreements are also considering the interests and the priorities of the Convention on Biological Diversity. So that's the first part in respect to Target 7. Target 19, I clearly hear you. We are looking at additional resources, innovative financing mechanisms, consolidation of resources, repurposing the available financial resources. But certainly your point in terms of looking at them using the legal means of raising the resources is something which will also receive a lot of attention. And as we are speaking now, there is an ongoing discussion on the need for all the 196 countries who are parties to the convention to come up with a national financing plan on how they will raise their resources to fill the gap of implementing the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And one of the groups that we are mentoring is essentially going to be focusing on that particular topic. Thank you, Sophia.
Great, excellent. Does anyone else want to comment? Alexandru?
Yeah, thank you, Sophia. On the issue of pollution, more precisely, You may be aware that in the EU, we launched a Zero Pollution Action Plan just a few months ago, which translates actually our vision for a pollution-free planet by 2050, so including in our partner countries. And there are also some intermediary targets by 2030, including as well a target on reducing plastic litter at sea by 50%, as well as microplastics released into the environment by 30% up to this date. So indeed, we are very much aware of the importance of tackling pollution, notably plastics, in order to support biodiversity efforts. And we are looking forward to working with you and with UNEP on that one as well. On the issue of financing, what I already mentioned also in the beginning. So indeed, in the EU, we try to safeguard these financial resources, which were almost doubled compared to the previous period for the next 7 years. And indeed, in our case, it would be mostly a traditional development aid, so including grants, support to international organizations, and so forth. But indeed, most increasingly, there will also be some form of innovative finance, notably by working with the private sector and providing also investment opportunities like guarantees, blends, and so forth. Yeah, I hope this answers a bit your question as well.
Thank you so much. I'm going to bring Ajith. Ajith, can you turn on your camera and your microphone, please? Ajith is in Africa. He's part of the National Biodiversity Network, and he had some comments about considering ecosystems.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for providing me this opportunity. Actually, I'm from India. I'm from I'm part of National Biodiversity Authority in India. My few suggestions here is that regarding target F, which speaks about 2050 goals and 2030 milestones, the first goal A speaks about enhancing ecosystem. So in that, I feel like we should consider milestone of about invasive alien species, because when we see in India, invasive alien species has been very it has disrupted whole ecosystems. There have been several examples that whole ecosystems have been disrupted just because even one small species of invasive alien species. So I think that can be even involved in a milestone of in that goal. And speaking of engaging youth in biodiversity conservation aspects, in India, we have recently, the ministry has been engaging youths in their network. So we have this program called Biodiversity Samrakshan Internship Program, and 20 people all over India have who are bright young minds who have been interested in conserving biodiversity and such topics have been involved in doing activities, implementing whatever that comes under CBD and the Biological Diversity Act of our country, India. All these 20 interns have been involved in all the decision-making processes and all the new aspects which whatever decision has been taken at the top level, say National Biodiversity Authority. I am one of the person who have been involved in that program. So I got this opportunity to be part of this program, and thanks for the opportunity. That's all from my side.
Thank you. Good. So, if I may, certainly, Ajit, you have a point, because your reflection was goal A speaks about the integrity of ecosystems, and your intention was to have focus on invasive alien species. Of course, you do have target 6 that focuses on invasive alien species. But if you look at the integrity of ecosystems, that is where the largest impact of invasive alien species are going to be felt, because it's essentially the disruption to the ecosystem, its disruption to the population of the species, and also its impact in terms of not only looking at elimination, but also the competition in terms of the native species. That is where the largest impact of invasive alien species do come in. So certainly, yes, goal A focuses on it, but we do have a specific target focusing on invasives. So I'm sure that we will our countries will take enough measures to deal with not just management and avoiding introduction, but also on eradicating invasive alien species, because as you know, that's the second largest threat to biodiversity loss comes from invasive alien species. And at one point, several years ago, the estimate was close to $1 trillion of economy is lost globally because of impacts of alien invasive species. Thank you.
First of all, I'm really glad that meetings like these and opportunities like these are being given more and more compared to the past decade in terms of youth engagement. And I think in the same direction, there's one area that we always miss out, that is a large dependency on government policies. You don't have to talk to a government to plant a tree. There's no restriction to plant, except areas where there are restrictions to plant a tree. You only need to engage a child, encourage that child to just take that seedling, go there, show them the process, and they'll do it. So I find that UN and many other organizations that are working, I love the work that GYBN is, the Global Youth Biodiversity Network is doing. And that engagement around 10 million people has to be extended to the overall 1.5 billion students across the globe. 2020 statistics show that there are close to 1.5 billion. So that's a huge human capital that has been untapped. That potential, if that outreach is extended in a very structured manner. Let me give an example. I am a part of TEB, Technology Education in Bogota. It's a private group. We teachers just started it for the sake of supporting and engaging students in the private and public education, technical education sector. And we never asked for any permission from any government. There was no need for that. We started engaging students, and we found that from 100, we have close to 25,000 students engaging in our competitions, in our activities. And that is the kind of impact that I would like to propose in the framework, that there has to be a separate emphasis on the student population that I'm mentioning as a 1.5 billion human task force that can be strongly engaged. If UN and all other organizations could even tap a target of 30% by 2030, that's a huge human capital force that can be moved in action. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about, action. Education, yes, I understand. There's hardly any school in the world that does not talk about the United Nations 2030 sustainability goals or the 2050 vision that is currently under development for climate change. But education apart, action is what could be done through students. One example I was going to give you was here in La Calera, where I work at Alcaparras. It's in La Calera, a town in the outskirts of the capital of Bogota, capital city Bogota of Colombia. And there's a school in the mountains which is working on repopulation and reproduction of certain native species of a very special ecosystem called as the Paramo. Less understood, there isn't much scientific research on the different species, and it's currently being investigated by the Ministry of Environment here. But look at that, this school and the students, I'm talking about students, children, have actually reproduced some of these species, understood how they work, how they grow, what are the nutrient cycles that they work with. And they're actually provisioning these reproduced species to repopulate to the government. Now, if we were to leave it in the hands of governments, we've always left it in the hands of governments, and we've seen how slow bureaucracy and logistics in governance are. So involving students into action, involving more and more student population into action is one of the suggestions I strongly would propose in the framework.
Indeed, I totally agree that action on the ground is what really drives everything, and that's why, as you mentioned, all the activities that were driven by the Global Youth Biodiversity Network in the last 10 years have led to the global processes and decision making and all that. But in the first place, they were encouraging local activities, young people to do things and then to report on those things and communicate those results, and then they can approach their local officials and then the national officials and then bring that up to the global level. But yeah, I completely agree with your suggestions. I think it's brilliant that even students are bringing seedlings to the government that are already screened and according to criteria. It's education, but it's practical. I really like this example. I'll remember it. And yeah, thank you very much for your inputs. I hope yes, GYBN Colombia can also work with you, and that this work can be multiplied and reach out to even more students. Thanks again.
I had one comment on target 2 of the first draft, and I'll start by setting out something that I think we can all agree upon, which is that for any marine protected area or for a marine area-based conservation measure to be actually effective and successful, it needs to have on board, in terms of support and participation, the local fishing communities that are impacted by the area. And while I did read the working group's report on its second meeting, and while discussing target 2, it does consider suggestions by parties to specifically recognize local communities. And I do think that it's praiseworthy that the component indicator to the target does use PAME, which incorporates the parameter of community involvement. However, I do believe that, especially when conservation policy is a collective and community effort, it's essential that this idea of sort of social proofing to start the ball rolling and to have other people fall in line, sort of rally and join together, a more explicit and a more top-down approach needs to be taken, especially in a country like India, where there's about 5 million marine fishers spread across 3,000 coastal villages, and we have a large coastal line, but we do see little participation from local fishing communities in the management of protected areas. So to that extent, I believe that a greater force needs to be given to pushing for community involvement when we talk about equitable management of marine protected areas, especially in light of the fact that I do believe that community involvement in Target 2 could then lead countries to be able to also push forth Target 13, which is for access and benefits sharing via community involvement, because I do believe that communities are more likely to support marine protected areas if they draw certain benefits out of them. And to this extent, I also had a question, which is, for anybody on the panel who would like to comment, whether you do believe that, and if I'm correct in thinking that Target 2 and Target 13 could be specifically linked to each other and pushed together.
Sure. I think certainly it's an important point in terms of engagement, in terms of participation, in terms of the voices of people and communities who not only are impacted, but who can impact some of these work on the ground as well. And certainly remember that any of these global targets, any of those indicators that are in use, it's completely up to the individual countries to shape on how activities, strategies, and priorities that are going to be set at the national level potentially contributes to that target using indicators. And that is why if you look at the implementation plan that is a part of the framework, it clearly requires countries to take that responsibility to define, because a lot of it are very specific to local socio-cultural and economic conditions as well. And certainly the point about links between Article 2 and Article 13 on access and benefit sharing, I mean, Target 2 and Target 13 on access and benefit sharing is certainly very relevant. And that is why the focus on access and benefit sharing should not be about these blockbuster multi-million-dollar drugs that comes after 20 years of research, a hit and miss in terms of 1 in about 1,000 that we are able to get the resources, monetary benefits. But it should be more in terms of identifying the co-benefits that come with conservation action, that come with sustainable management of ecosystem, that come with participation of the stakeholders, whether they are women, whether they are indigenous and local communities or youth. So the focus at the national level should be more in terms of capturing some of those elements, rather than looking and waiting for an ideal opportunity that will fulfill all the individual words that are mentioned in the target and the indicators thereof. So certainly valid point. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, first of all, for the opportunity to speak. And after reviewing with my classmates the document, we were interested in Part J of responsibility and transparency, especially because I think it puts a lot of responsibility on governments to act using this document or following this plan. And in our country, Honduras, and I think this is in many parts, transparency is it's almost inexistent. There's a lot of corruption, the government is inefficient, and climate actions are not taken so seriously. And then in target number 20 and 21, it mentions that it's very important to develop platforms and alliances to communicate with communities around a country. But there's another problem, especially in our experiences, that usually movements or groups that try to speak about these problems are suppressed by the government, the police, or big corporations. So my question would be, how can a country ensure that all activities and financial flows are aligned with biodiversity rules when there's no transparency in these values being taken in consideration from government authorities and officials who aren't fully committed to a responsibility of planning, monitoring, and reporting this plan? Thank you.
Indeed, yeah. And I think that Bala would complement as well. This is indeed what we were trying to put in place also with the program that we are implementing jointly, the support to multilateral environmental agreements. Because indeed through this program and through our partnership with UNEP, we try to support partner countries in first of all in implementing their commitments taken in the framework of multilateral environmental agreements, including the CBD, but also at the regional conventions on sea biodiversity and so forth. And also, so on one side, we are working with the countries and with the governments in order to make their reporting more transparent and to increase their compliance with the international standards that they agree with. But on the other side, we are also working with the civil society in order to empower you, for example, to participate to the CBT negotiations and so forth. So we are really glad to continue collaboration with UNEP on this issue, and I'm sure that Bala would like to complement as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Alex. I may quickly complement what Alex said directly in response to that particular question. Yes. See, if you're looking at measuring transparency, if you're looking at measuring the impact of activities on the ground that is visible, that is marked by a certain level of probity, a couple of things are very, very important. One is the ability of governments to engage with stakeholder groups, not only in spreading the ownership of the need to achieve the targets, but also capturing the kind of initiatives that are being implemented by other stakeholder groups when the national reports are being done. And if you look at the current discussions in terms of that aspect of it, in terms of looking at non-state actors, the non-governmental part of the stakeholder group, definitely there is a big push for making that happen and having those sets of activities reported. That's the first part of it. The second part of it is that to a certain extent, the transparency also comes with a level of commitment, also a level of predictability in terms of the actions that governments would like to put in place in support of realizing the Global Biodiversity Framework. And if you look at the document that is currently available, it is not only looking at implementation by the governments or the states or the contracting parties to the convention, but it also is asking for countries to come up with some measurable targets with measurable activities that can be tested by a set of impact assessments as well. And that's why we have a series of measures that are being suggested, not at COP15, but after COP15, from COP16 onwards, in terms of how to measure the work and how to measure the impacts of work. And lastly, and importantly, the stakeholder engagement, the stakeholder involvement is going to be a very, very important element when you are looking at the transparency-based issues. And that is why national reporting and the kind of frameworks that are suggested at the global level to improve the efficiency of national reporting that looks at some of these elements are going to be the key for the effective implementation of the framework. Thank you.
I just want to raise several questions about what we are concerned about the project. I'm thinking that during the recent 2 years, when we human beings are facing the coronavirus pandemic, due to the substantial reduction of human activities and the disturbance to nature, some scientists have reported that the quality of the environment, including the air, water, and animal reproduction, are getting better to some degree. So I'm thinking that we can learn something from the experiments of our human intervention to the biodiversity brought by the coronavirus pandemic. So one important thing is how to keep more space for the nature after the ending of the coronavirus pandemic. I think it may be necessary to judge the impact of our human behaviors on the biodiversity, just like the evaluation of carbon footprint or ecology footprint on each behavior or each goods. Could we create a standard of the evaluation of our behaviors on the biodiversity? And this is my first question and my first comment. And the second comment is that I'm a soil scientist, teenager scientist, and I'm also focusing on the microbial biodiversity of the soil. Actually, the soil contains maybe 1/4 of the global biodiversity. But what is the relationship between the microbiodiversity below the ground and the plant and animal biodiversity above the ground? Actually, we are more focusing on the biodiversity above the ground. We seldom focus the biodiversity below our ground. So this is my second concern. And my third concern is that because, during the long history of the Earth, actually several drop of biodiversity, that is the mass extinction events, happened during the circumstances of substantial climate change. But that climate change is usually due to the natural power. However, nowadays, our human beings actually occur at a very short recent time. But our human activities, rather than the nature power, are accelerating the climate change. So could we prevent the next mass extinction event happening near the future? So could we give more information or solution to evaluate and prevent the next mass extinction event from happening? So maybe we can supplement such information for our project. Thank you.
It was not until very recently, I would say just a few years ago, that we have heard the importance of linking social sciences with natural sciences in our need to achieve the targets that we've been setting ourselves for. Because a lot of times the social scientists work independent of natural scientists. But if you look at the theory of change and the documentation, the early part of the Global Biodiversity Framework, there is that element of the behavioral change that has been put in place for the first time. I've been following CBD right from the beginning. I've seen 14 COPs. So for the first time, formally, we are seeing the word behavioral change as a part of this particular framework, both in terms of its development as well as its implementation. So I completely agree with you. We may have trillions of dollars worth of investment going into biodiversity conservation. We have all the heads of state in the world want to do conservation. But if the behavior of the last individual on the ground is not going to change, how much of our policies we have, how many frameworks we have, how much of resources we put into achieving our targets, achieving our interest to conserve nature, protect the planet, we will not be able to achieve them. So behavioral change, behavioral sciences are going to be very, very important as biodiversity science, as important as natural sciences in achieving this particular global biodiversity framework. No questions about that, and certainly I agree with you. The second point on soil biodiversity, if you look at the scientific body on science and technology based inputs into the CBD process, the SUBSTA that was held a couple of months ago in May and June this year, the focus, one of the areas of focus is very specifically to work on implementing the 2020 to 2030 international action agenda on soil biodiversity. So there is already an important area of discussion supported by FAO, the UN Food and Agricultural Organization. And I completely agree with you in terms of the need to look at soil biodiversity, and that is receiving a lot of attention. And remember, the moment biodiversity as a word is used, there is no distinction between what kind of biodiversity, whether it is on the ground, below the ground, microbes, insects, plants, animals. It includes all the life forms under the convention except human biodiversity. So certainly that is receiving a lot of attention, and the productivity of any ecosystem squarely lies on the health of the soil, whether it is agriculture, whether it is forestry, or whether it is the fisheries when it comes to the ocean or coastal ecosystem. So that part is also something which is absolutely taken care of in the discussions that led to this particular framework. But I'm just trying to remember your third point, Sophia or Q, if you can remind me, what was your third question?
My third question is, since our human beings activities rather than the natural power are accelerating the climate change.
Right. Okay.
So I think
certainly, yes. I mean, that's a very valid point, and that is why, even though it is relatively late, personally for me, currently the discussions within the Convention on Biological Diversity on linking up with actions on climate change has been there for many years. A lot of decisions, a lot of recommendations, a lot of ideas. But when it comes to climate change, the idea of the importance of biodiversity, the importance of nature as a contributor to climate adaptation and mitigation is now receiving, if you take the last 2 or 3 months, the number of ideas that are being put forward and the importance of biodiversity and nature to achieve our climate goals is receiving its due attention, even though late, but it is receiving its attention, and we hope that the forthcoming COP26 of the Climate Convention would address it as a priority. Thank you.
So my question was on the impacts of COVID-19 and whether the Global Biodiversity Framework will incorporate it such that, like in Africa, right now they're looking at recovering from COVID-19. So the socioeconomic part of it. Not everyone is looking at conserving biodiversity, especially on the industrial side. So my question is, how will this framework incorporate now the impacts of COVID-19? Thank you.
Yeah, if you look at target number 2, target number 5, that particular target focuses on the issue of the impacts in terms of human health and biodiversity. It asks for ensuring that harvesting, trade, and use of wild species is sustainable, legal, and safe for human health. So certainly we do have some focus on it, and the impact of COVID on the GBF, I would say, can be on 2 aspects. One, the ongoing discussions to have an enhanced focus on the links between biodiversity conservation, ecosystem integrity, and ecosystem management, so that we will not be facing a similar kind of a pandemic in the future, is one aspect of it. And there is a full-fledged program that is being discussed in terms of biodiversity and health. The second aspect of it is in relation to the ability of countries to focus on conservation and development or recovery post-COVID. And that is also receiving attention to the extent that more and more countries are encouraged in terms of looking at their recovery plans post-COVID that actually contribute positively to biodiversity conservation, manage biodiversity and ecosystems well, rather than looking at short-term, quick economic gains or development activities that will only look at raising the incomes or getting the lost economies back on track. So certainly on both the counts, the discussions are underway, and certainly the targets will definitely be speaking to some of those aspects.
Good evening, every speakers, and it's my pleasure to have this opportunity to participate in this discussion and ask my questions. And after reading the first draft document, I have 2 questions. The first is, in 2030 action targets part, the target 11 maintain and enhance nature's contributions to regulation of air quality and quantity of water. And I think this is very important, and which needs to specific explanation on how to ensure nature's purification of air and water quality, and what role humans should play in this process. And the second question is that in terms of biodiversity conservation, it should be said that everyone is equal and has a responsibility, not a right. So why we emphasize on ensuring the participation of women, youth, and indigenous peoples in this draft? And is it because they are vulnerable? But I think biodiversity conservation, unlike the economic development, the women, youth, and indigenous peoples are not in an entirely weak position. So why we stress it? Thank you.
Let me start with the second question first. It's not because of the vulnerability of women and girls and youth that some of these and the indigenous and local communities who are identified as a part of this particular framework. It's because of the immense contributions these stakeholders make for biodiversity conservation, for sustainable use and management of the resources. But in spite of their immense contributions, their traditional knowledge that contributes to better management of ecosystems and biodiversity, the recognition that these groups of stakeholders get is very limited. If you take, for example, the indigenous and local communities, for example, if you take China, you have 55 ethnic minorities in China, the contributions of their traditional knowledge, their contributions in terms of ecosystem management and biodiversity conservation has been immense. But to an extent, their contribution is never formally recognized. If you take agriculture, the knowledge and the ability of women farmers in terms of saving the seed, in terms of selecting the seed, in terms of agricultural practices, not just in high-end, large-scale farming, but at the local level, subsistence farming has been very, very significant, but they did not receive the recognition. So the reason why these groups of people are recognized or mentioned very specifically in the framework is to provide them that recognition, is to ensure that their contributions are appropriately rewarded, their contributions are heard, their contributions are considered at the decision making, at the global level, at the regional level, at the national level. It is not to do with their vulnerability, but it is a positive contribution of them and their actions to conservation that we want, that needs to be recognized more formally. With respect to your first question on pollution, yes, it is going to be an important element. It's just not one stakeholder. One municipality or one local government that needs to deal with it. It has to be a combination of activities at the local level, activities at the provincial level, activities at the national and global levels as well. Thank you.
Yeah, indeed, to subscribe to what Bala just said, and unfortunately, I think it's actually a mix of both, because indeed we, indigenous people and women are still, in some cases, quite disadvantaged, and there are still, unfortunately, a lot of abuses, as I see also in the chat, the participant from Colombia mentioned. So it's indeed mostly for their contribution and highlighting their contribution, making sure that they are recognized and that their benefits are equally shared among the members of the society. But then indeed there is still a need to further protect these groups and to make sure that their rights are respected with regards to access and benefits from that they can get from biodiversity and from ecosystem services and resources. But otherwise, indeed, fully agree with Bala's answer that their contribution is very much needed, and that's why they have a prominent place in the convention.
Yes, now that we're on the topic on indigenous people and minorities, I would just like to add the comment that I think it would be great if we could include or broaden targets in which community engagement and participation is mentioned, especially emphasizing on the translation of these documents or the discussions that these groups make. Because most of the time, these minority groups also speak minority languages, especially traditional and indigenous groups. And most of the time, these groups inhabit land that is included inside the protected areas in most documents of these international meetings. So I think it would be important to also include that governments should present a plan in which they show and socialize these initiatives with those groups in their own languages. Because most of the time, the issue we have with participation or inclusion or equity in this type of meetings is the fact that they're not accessible to those groups, or they don't feel included since their languages are just tossed aside. So I think that's just the comment I wanted to make.
That's great. Thank you, Gabrielle. I want to bring in Felix. Felix, can you turn on your camera and your microphone? Felix is from the European Youth and Environment, Europe, and he has some comments, some specific questions about fresh water in the framework.
Hello, hi, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak and for creating the space here today. Yes, exactly. I had a few comments and suggestions that are freshwater specific, specifically for target 1 and 3. After reviewing this with some colleagues, it just seems that the proposed approach to global target setting, conservation planning, and tracking protected area network focuses heavily on land and sea areas, and is thus insufficient for securing and improving freshwater biodiversity and ecosystem function. In order to meet the 2030 and 2050 goals of the GBF, we therefore strongly recommend revisions to the targets and indicators to explicitly include freshwater ecosystems, biodiversity, and their unique needs. There's a significant weight of evidence for this recommendation, as the standing assumption that terrestrial planning and protected areas will meet the needs of freshwater biodiversity and ecosystems has been refuted at the global, regional, and local scales. Just naming one example, in places where terrestrial protected areas do currently provide some benefits to freshwater biodiversity, this protection often lacks durability, as evidenced by the globally widespread development of large dams inside protected areas. And therefore, the recommendation would be to explicitly include freshwater in targets 1 and 3. And as a last suggestion as well, on target 21, we also suggest making deliberate reference to freshwaters here, making this and to ensure the equitable and effective participation and decision-making related to biodiversity by indigenous peoples and local communities, and respect their rights over lands, waters, territories, and resources, as well as by women, girls, and youth. Thank you very much.
Just that indeed, I totally subscribe to what Felix just said. It's the role of fresh water. It's really important. Of course, this would be, I guess, to Bala and to the colleagues from the CBT to take it on board. Just to subscribe indeed to what Felix just said. And maybe Bala, would you would like to provide more details?
Thank you, Alex. I mean, just to mention that valid point in terms of the need to focus on freshwater ecosystems, but as you can understand, the language of target 1 and the language of target 3 very clearly includes focus on freshwater ecosystem. And certainly, if you look at the elements of our experience working on some of those issues, indicate that there is a need to look at some of them, and certainly point well taken. Okay, if I may, I mean, the question is simple. It says that, look, there is the target 12 that speaks about increasing the area of the green and blue spaces, and how it is possible. I mean, it's not necessarily to promote biodiversity, though it aims to create more space. And then he also says that according to some researchers, factors like species in spaces and management may prevent the spaces from restoring biodiversity in the city. Actually, it has to be, the particular target has to be read in the context. So it is more in terms of enhancing the protection, but also enhancing the management. In addition to looking at the physical space of these spaces to be enhanced. If you look at the target number 3, for example, it very clearly says that there is the need to ensure that at least 30% of land area and sea areas that are important for biodiversity are appropriately managed, appropriately protected and conserved. So my suggestion is to read this target in light of target 3 as well. And we're just not looking at increasing the space in terms of a physical space, but also in terms of the quality of some of these spaces as well. And certainly, if for one, Hanjing knows much better, because when I was there in China last, we actually met with the urban planning officials and senior people from the Beijing municipality in terms of a number of activities that are happening in a city like China, in terms of enhancing the urban biodiversity, creating the green spaces in terms of some of those elements as well. Thank you.
So to start, I would like to recall the words from the sociologist Jordan Peterson from a talk I heard a couple of months ago. And so it was that climate change is not a chance to unite the world nations into like seeking for some better future, but instead it is a chance for us to see that kind of one of the manifestations of the consequences of our actions. So that's kind of the main point, or like the main idea that I want to recall in the 3 questions, in part kind of the things I'm going to talk now. The first one is that to produce great actions, we need great ideas. And so it's not only to think about ideas that will slowly become better and bigger and will kind of solve the issue, but is that these great actions that you are providing us with in the document could actually create like an impact in the world. So I would like to thank you for providing them, on kind of for sharing them with us, for us to know and to just talk about them in our school or in our community, so it could actually become or make a bigger impact. However, I saw some sort of paradoxes in parts of the document. The first one is that in third world countries like Colombia, which coincidentally have one of the biggest diversities in the world, they kind of account for a great margin error in terms of the financial aspects, as poverty and some diseases are seen to have like a great impact on the population. Because as one of my partner told already, it out of the corruption issues we have in our countries are pretty like a pretty big deal. So it's not only to talk about the money that will be provided to these communities in order to help tackle the climate crisis, but it is also to see that most of that money will not arrive to these families and to these people. So it is kind of to ask, how can these proposals related to money be more attractive to national budgets in terms of safety and in terms of values that could actually help people. The second one is related to target 5 of the 2030 action targets of reducing threats in biodiversity. And so it is that the solution does not rely on only diminishing the pollution levels to safe amounts, because there's actually not a way to measure safe amounts for people. And these pollution levels will still arrive to the ozone layer. So and the earth will just warm up more. So there's once again this paradox that is, if we remove them completely, it means that we will also need to kind of shut down these companies that gain their wealth, or kind of their money from the extraction and refining of minerals, gases, and petroleum. So in cases like Colombia, it bases 55.4% of exportations in petroleum. So kind of just removing this is not actually a chance we have. And also this employment will rise considerably. But on the other side, we will be helping with this climate change crisis. So it's kind of to check how these both variables can balance, because we cannot just make some benefit for the greater cause instead of making a benefit for all, which is what we want. And the third one is that most of the money is quantified in dollars, but in cases like Colombia, there's a huge devalue in the coin. So it's kind of to check how this both things could once again balance for nations to be able to actually achieve it. And the kind of the last thing I've got is not a question, but it's more like of a contribution. So it is that we need to have cycles with all of this we have. So it is that some solution or like some invention, some idea we have could actually make, once again, some cycle that gets some financial benefit, and it will once again return to its initial point. So it is to create the idea, to provide a financial kind of output, and then once again, that part of that financial output will be placed in the original idea. So everything is just a cycle and nothing else is disrupted. So thank you.
And thank you very much, Daniela, for the questions. So your first question, indeed, I think it's definitely important to have a human rights approach when addressing conservation and biodiversity protection in general. And the European Commission, indeed, in all our projects, we are working with partner governments and with the implementing partners to make sure that human rights based approaches are implemented, and that all our projects are developing good governance principles and participative management. And this applies also for investments, as you mentioned, that indeed it's very much important that all the benefits from investments are returned to the communities. And that's why in our case, we provide seed financing basically and guarantees in order to make sure that local communities can access environmental finance and climate finance that they can further use for the development of their communities. So I think Bala, if you could hear us, so I guess these were the two main questions of Daniela about human rights and on yeah.
Sure. I mean, certainly the focus on human rights within the Biodiversity Convention has been relatively recent. Because as you know, the UN Human Rights Commission has a special rapporteur, and there was a report that was presented by the special rapporteur on the links between biodiversity and human rights in 2018. And since then, there's been a significant amount of focus on how to ensure that human rights related issues are appropriately considered in discussions with the conventions. And certainly that's where you see a reflection of some of those within the targets and also on the implementation framework. So certainly the focus and the importance that is being given for not just rights-based approach, but also on the human rights element of it has been receiving a lot of attention.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm going to give my closing remarks and in form of a vote of thanks. I want to start with the organizers. I want to thank Hanning Lee, who is the Regional Vice Chair, East Asia for IUCN Commission on Education and Communication. She's also been the one coordinating the China region on this. And I also want to thank Sophia Ramirez, GRULAC Junior, coordinating the Latin American and the Caribbean regions. And I want to go to the speakers and the presenters for this event to thank Dr. Balakrishna Pisupati, the head of Biodiversity Program in the UNEP. I want to thank Fernando Casas, the founder of GRULAC Junior. I want to thank Chantal, the Secretariat for the Convention on Biological Diversity. I want to thank Alexandru, who has been representing the European Union. I also want to thank Emma, who is the youth representative in the Finnish national delegation. And also the final presenter is Sweta from GYBN, Global South Focal Point. Thank you, speakers and presenters. And then I want to go to the participants to thank all the youth networks who attended this session, youth networks from various regions, Africa, Europe, China, Latin American, Caribbean, amongst other regions. So there were also other regions. I also want to thank the youth who are participating from the ACP MEAs Youth Empowerment and Training Initiative Program, which Bala mentioned earlier on. And then lastly, I want to thank our partners from the European Union, from the UNEP, and one of the programs in UNEP known as the ACP MEAs program, thanking our partner IUCN Commission on Education and Communication. I also want to thank the Caribbean Youth Environmental Network. I also want to thank the Global Youth Biodiversity Network for your very strong support, which was coordinated by Christian. Thanking GRULAC Junior, as I mentioned, Sophia has been amazing in all this. And Fernando, thank you too. And lastly, to thank the Organization of Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific States for all the coordination and support. So these are my few remarks, and thank you all, and see you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you very much. And you know, I mean, the last couple of weeks has been extremely hectic for us because at UNEP, you know, we've been working with the national focal points, the negotiators for the Global Biodiversity Framework, who will be starting their negotiation, their discussions. There's no negotiation, there's only a discussion that will happen from next week, 23rd of August till 3rd of September. We just completed about 5 different regional consultations in different parts of the world. And this actually is to an extent, the 6th and the most refreshing ones, if I may say so. The reason is that, you know, at least Mary, you were a part of those regional meetings. So essentially, to an extent, it's very, very difficult for engaging in a conversation to really sort of bring people out to say what they want to say, their ideas, their priorities. And that way, I think this particular consultation has been extremely, extremely fruitful, revealing, and it clearly shows the intent and the interests of youth to engage in these conversations. And as I mentioned, from UNEP, we certainly look forward to working with all of you, and through you, other networks and other youth who are interested in pushing forward the idea of not just participation of youth in these processes, but also to empower youth so that they actually can lead that change, can lead that kind of a transformative change that is required for us to secure the environment for their future and the future generations to come, the aspect of intergenerational equity. But if I'm going to tell that if there is honestly one individual who really made this particular consultation so brilliant, so good, and so technologically savvy, it's Sophia. Sophia, I think I'm going to get you involved in almost all the other meetings, irrespective of whether they are youth or others, because the way you actually managed to pull this all together in less than a month, right? When we started the discussion to where we are has been extremely brilliant. And thanks a lot, Fernando, because it was just a very informal chat we had about the idea of organizing this almost about less than 5 weeks ago. And here we are, having 150 plus youth participating in this discussion and brilliant inputs and support. So thank you, Fernando, for the collaboration. Thank you, Sophia, for the support, and also to all the participants, Alex, Hanning, and all the colleagues who actually were able to be a part of it. So thank you very much. And as I mentioned, that we are trying to prepare a short report, not more than a page, with some key points, which we will share with all of you as quickly as possible, preferably before Monday, so that it reaches the co-chairs and the secretariat in time when they open the working group meeting on Monday. So we're trying to work on it. So please do keep in touch. And certainly thanks a lot, essentially to Mary also. Mary leads our work on youth. And certainly we are looking forward to more interesting engagements in the times to come, in the weeks and months to come. So have a great day, have a great evening, and certainly it's very late for our colleagues from China. Hanjing, thank you very much for staying up so late for us. Thanks a lot and have a great day. Thank you.
Okay.